Hello students, hope you are safe at home. Today I will teach you the third chapter of history, that is the peasants and the Raj. In this chapter you will study about colonial agrarian policies, revenue settlements in British India, that is permanent settlement, Mehalwari settlement, Rayatwari settlement, commercialization of agriculture and cultivation, demand for indigo, indigo cultivation, the Blue Rebellion or Indigo Revolt, the consequences of the revolt. So, children, let us begin the chapter. In the previous chapter, you studied how the British started acquiring land and the rights to administer them from the kings and rulers. You also studied how they started to enact their own rules and laws to control the people who lived in those territories. In the meanwhile, the Industrial Revolution had gained momentum in Europe, and this made them more ambitious to utilize the resources of these occupied territories. In this chapter, we shall study about the agrarian policies they adopted in the rural areas to extract the maximum from the farmers and their impact on the Indian society. So let us see colonial agrarian policies. The dual system of governance started by the British in Bengal aimed at increasing the revenue for the company and buy fine cotton and silk cloth at cheap rates with that revenue. The urge to maximize revenue directly led to the infamous Bengal famine of 1770, in which one-third of the population of Bengal perished and agriculture was abandoned in many parts of Bengal. So the East India Company embarked on a systematic approach to land revenue collection with a view to collecting the maximum amount of revenue in a timely and predictable manner. The East India Company introduced three main types of land revenue settlements in India. The permanent settlement covered Bengal, Bihar, Orissa and the Banaras division of Uttar Pradesh, accounting for 19% of the British territories. The Rayatwari settlement covering Bombay and Madras presidencies, accounting for 51% of the company's territories. The Mehalwari settlement accounted for 30% of the company's territory, covering United Provinces, that is, the large parts of modern-day Uttar Pradesh, Central Provinces and Punjab. So let us see the revenue settlements in British India. Permanent settlement was introduced by Lord Cornwallis in 1793. So let us see its feature and consequences. The landowners of zamindars emerged as a class of loyal allies to the East India Company. The zamindars got hereditary rights over their land. The farmers became tenants and lost the right to the use of pastures, forest lands, irrigation, canals and fishing ponds. The income of the company from land revenue became secure and regular. The farmers were left at the mercy of the zamindars, who often extracted exorbitant rates from them. The peasants were forced to pay the revenue even the crops failed. Hence, they were forced to borrow money from the moneylenders at high interest rate. In case of non-repayment of loans, the land was mortgaged and the peasant had to look for an alternate employment and even migrate to cities. In many places, moneylenders replaced the old landlords who took no interest in improving agricultural production. Many of them were absentee landlords who leased out their lands to tenants and lived in cities. With the time, the company realized that fixed revenue demand was not very good for them, and company officials were convinced that revenue system was required to be changed to meet the increasing expenses of the administration. Now let us see the Mehalwari settlement, which was introduced by Holt Mackenzie in 1822. Let us see the key features and consequences of this system. The unit of revenue settlement was the village or the mahal, and the revenue demand was made collectively on the village. The village headman or the lumbardar was responsible for collecting the revenue and making it to the government. The lumbardars fixed the revenue on the basis of the type of land, total land under cultivation, and customs and rights of different agricultural groups. The estimated revenue of each plot within a village was added up to calculate the revenue that each village, that is mahal, had to pay. The rate of revenue was to be revised periodically and not fixed permanently. Even under this system, the revenue rates used to be very high and the condition of peasants remained miserable under this system. Peasants were exploited by the village headmen. Now let us see the next settlement, that is Rayatwari settlement, which was introduced by Thomas Munro in 1820. Let us see the key features and consequences. The land revenue was not collected by the zamindars but was taken from the ryots or cultivators directly. The cultivators became the landowners and there was no intermediary for collecting the revenue. The revenue was very high and collected rigidly. The cultivator had to pay even if his crops were destroyed. The land revenue was revised and increased after every 20 or 30 years. This system benefited the government instead of the cultivators, as the company itself became the zamindar. The peasants were overburdened with heavy taxes. They often had to take a loan to pay the land revenue. So what was the impact of revenue policies? In general, it can be stated that all these policies were followed to realize the maximum revenue and send a part of it to England. The interests of the cultivators were ignored. Small landowners were forced to mortgage their lands to the moneylenders as they had to pay revenue to the government by the fixed rate. In this process, land got fragmented and it affected the production. Land became a saleable commodity as the oppressive policies of the revenue officials forced the peasants to sell their property to pay off the revenue. The village lost their self-sufficiency and some peasants started to grow cash crops like indigo with the hope to earn large profit in a short span of time. So now let us see the commercialization of agriculture and cultivation. The term commercialization means production of something for sale in the market. Commercialization of agriculture simply means that a peasant grows more than he and his family can consume and he sells the rest in the market. It usually happens in an economy where the land revenue demand is in cash and not as a part of the produce. In India, after the various land revenue settlements were put in the place, the commercialization of agriculture took place. All the three land revenue settlements that we read were based on cash payment. So the zamindar, lambardar or the ryot had to make enough provision for cash by selling a part of the produce in the market to be able to pay cash revenue. So let us see the farming of cash crops in India. Cash crops are grown with the purpose of selling in the market to get money. Britishers forced the peasants to grow indigo, opium, jute, tea, rubber, sugarcane, etc. These crops were grown with the purpose of sending them to Europe to get huge profits. These crops were grown on large estates which were called plantations and their owners were called planters. Most of these planters had come from Britain with the hope of making huge profits from these crops as there was a good demand of these crops in Europe. In fact, in certain parts of the country, peasants were lured to grow commercial crops like tea, opium, jute, etc. There were two important results of cultivation of cash crops on peasants. First, since these were sold in international markets, their demand fluctuated widely. While in the good years, it benefited the peasants to some extent. In the bad years, the peasants suffered very badly. In the absence of cash from cash crops and because of the fact that much of the land was set aside for non-food crops, the peasants did not have even enough to eat. Famine therefore became a standing feature of the Indian subcontinent. So if the colonial rule began with the Bengal famine of 1770, it also ended with the Bengal famine of 1943. Many peasants rebelled against such oppressive practices. So let us see demand for indigo. Indigo has been an important source of the blue dye for thousands of years. There are over 300 species of Indigofera growing throughout the tropics. Indigofera yields indigo tin, one of the most color-fast natural dyes, compatible with all fibers like wool, cotton, silk and linen. Unlike other plant dyes, indigo dyeing process is simple and needs lesser effort. There was a great demand of indigo in the European countries. The British textile industry was largely dependent on indigo produced in India. By the 13th century, Indian indigo was being used by cloth manufacturers in Italy, France and Britain to dye cloth. However, only small quantity of Indian indigo reached the European market and its price was very high. European cloth manufacturers therefore had to depend on other plant called woad, which was easily available in Europe. However, European cloth manufacturers preferred Indian indigo rather than European woad, as indigo produced a rich blue color whereas woad produced a pale and dull blue color. The British established commercial cultivation and production of indigo in India. Initial plantation began in 1777 and by 1788 most of the production of indigo purchased by the East India Company originated from Bengal. The system became deeply exploitative. Vast quantities of indigo were concentrated around Bengal. These areas was the local point for processing and trade. Now let us see indigo cultivation. There were two systems of cultivating indigo during the British Raj. These were namely the Nij and the Royalty systems. Let us see the Nij system. Nij was a system of indigo cultivation where the planter produced indigo on lands that he directly controlled. He either owned the land or took it on hire to cultivate indigo with hired peasants. So what was the problem with the niche cultivation? The problem with niche cultivation can be grouped under three heads like the land, the labor and the farming aids. Land related problems. Indigo cultivation required highly fertile lands and to make them commercially viable, it was important to cultivate it on compact and larger land holdings. As the areas were already densely populated, only small plots scattered could be acquired. This led to attempts to take over land of other farmers by force and became the cause of conflict and tensions. The second problem was land labor related problems. A vast spread plantation required large number of hands to help in the fields. In those days, most of the work was manual and no major technology was available in farming activities. Unfortunately, the cropping season was such that the labor was required in same time of the year when they were busy in rice cultivation. The next problem was related to farming aids. Indigo cultivation on vast stretches of land required many plows and bullocks. The requirement was nearly double the requirement as compared to a rice field of the same size. Such large amount of bullocks or plows were neither available easily nor manageable, and more so as the season for cultivation was parallel to the rice cultivation. But as indigo plantation was expected to get better returns from sale, big farmers tried to compete and therefore there was social conflict and unrest. Now let us see the next system, that is royalty system. Under the royalty system, the planters forced the ryots, that is peasants, to sign an agreement or a contract. Those who signed the contract got cash advances from the planters at low rates of interest to produce indigo. But the loan terms insisted that the ryot cultivate indigo on at least 25% of the area under his holding. The planters provided the drill and the seed. The cultivators prepared the soil, sowed the seed and took care of the crop. The planters forced the farmers to grow indigo on the best soil. So what problems arose due to the royalty system. The problem with the system was that while the loan was provided, it could never be paid back by the peasants and they got into a vicious cycle of loans and debt. The indigo plant was negatively affecting the quality of the soil. It had deep roots and took away the soil nutrients, making it unfit for any cultivation subsequently. By this, even the best soil became infertile and there were long-term losses to the farmer. So let us see the next topic, that is the Blue Rebellion or Indigo Revolt. The series of such methods of exploiting the poor farmers and peasants made them understand that the planters had slowly eaten into their systems and many farmers had got into debt traps. Land holding were being lost due to poor outputs, and this realization emerged as the basic cause of resistance towards farming of indigo. In March 1859, riots in Bengal refused to grow indigo and refused to pay rents to the planters. The revolt started from district of Nadia, where Digambar Viswas and Vishnu Charan Viswas first took up arms against the planters. The revolt spread like wildfire in the other districts of Murshidabad, Birbhum, Bardwan, Pabna, Khulna, Narel, etc. Many indigo planters were put into public trial and executed. The indigo depots were burnt down. At some places, they even attacked indigo factories and socially boycotted those peasants who worked for the planters. Riots decided not to take any advances from the planters to sow indigo. In many villages, headmen who had been forced to sign indigo contracts mobilized the indigo peasants and fought against the indigo planters. The indigo depots were burnt down. Many planters fled to avoid being caught. Some of the zamindars who had sided with the planters were also targets of the revolting peasants. The revolt was ruthlessly suppressed. Large forces of police and military backed by the British government and the zamindars mercilessly slaughtered a number of peasants. In spite of this, the revolt was fairly popular, involving almost the whole of Bengal. You know, students, a play written by Dinbandhu Mitra by the name of Neel Darpan played a very important role in the Indigo Revolt. It had depicted the exploitation of indigo peasants. So what was the consequences of the revolt? The revolt had a strong effect on the government, which immediately appointed the Indigo Commission in 1860. In the commission report, E.W.L. Tower noted that not a chest of indigo reached England without being stained with human blood. Evidently, it was a major trump of the peasant to incite such emotions in the European's mind. The commission held the planters guilty and criticized them for the coercive method they used with indigo cultivators. The planters then shifted their indigo cultivation to Bihar. However, their business was seriously affected by the introduction of synthetic dyes in Europe. Simultaneously, the condition of peasants in Bihar also got bad. A movement led by Mahatma Gandhi from Champaran in 1917 once again brought the rights of the farmer into limelight and helped them out of the problems caused by the indigo plantation. So children, this was the chapter that how the peasants, the farmers were exploited by the Britishers due to their introduction of new policies in India. So children, go through the chapter, read each topic of the chapter and understand the concept and try to do the book exercises. Thank you. Stay home, stay safe and stay happy.